reforming the Palestinian Authority, which exercises limited rule in the Israeli-occupied West Bank. The United States welcomed the new cabinet, saying a revitalized Palestinian Authority was essential. Salvage crews at the US port of Baltimore have removed the first section of the bridge that was brought down on Tuesday when it was hit by a cargo ship. The accidents blocked a major waterway, as Grant Ferret reports.
Baltimore is one of the United States' busiest ports, and the authorities are keen to reopen it as soon as possible. A statement from the Coast Guard said a first section of the Francis Scott Key Bridge, weighing 200 tons, had been cut free. It's being transferred to a barge, which will later take it ashore. But officials have warned that the operation to clear thousands of tons of wreckage, some of which is tangled around the stricken cargo ship, is highly complex. They've refused to give a clear indication of when they expect to complete it.
This is the world news from the BBC. The US military says it's destroyed another 2 drones belonging to the Iranian-backed Houthi movement in Yemen. US Central Command said one was shot down over the Red Sea, the second was destroyed on the ground in Yemen. It stressed that drones posed an imminent threat to shipping in the region. The Houthis have carried out numerous attacks on vessels in recent months. A new hate crime law has come into effect in Scotland 3 years after it was passed by the Scottish Parliament. It creates a new offence of stirring up hatred in relation to characteristics including age, disability, religion and sexual orientation. The maximum sentence for those found guilty is 7 years in jail. One of Hong Kong's best-known independent bookstores has closed its doors for the last time, as freedom of expression in the territory comes under further pressure. Hundreds of well-wishers went to Mount Zero Books on its final day. The owners blamed the closure on a large number of inspections carried out by the authorities in response to anonymous complaints. A tech investor has bought a burial crypt close to where the film star Marilyn Monroe was laid to rest at an auction in the United States. Here's Alfie Habersham with the details.
Don't meet your heroes, so the saying goes, and that seems to be the plan for Anthony Jabin, a tech investor from Beverly Hills. He's going to be buried next to his instead, because he's snapped up a crypt near to Marilyn Monroe for nearly $200,000 at an auction in Los Angeles. He says he's always dreamt of being close to her, but he's not the only one, because alongside the 50s movie star lies the Playboy founder Hugh Hefner. Anthony Jabin seems to be a fan of them both. At the auction, he also bought Hugh Hefner's round bed, built for use in the original Playboy mansion, as well as Marilyn Monroe's bathing suit.
Alfie Habersham with that report. And that's the latest BBC News.
People fixing the world. Welcome to People Fixing the World from the BBC World Service. With me, Myra Anubi. On this program, I find out about some of the brilliant solutions people have come up with to fix global problems. This week, it's all about greener ways to feed the world with innovative dairy products and food forests in cities. Now, I live in a city and there are so many stores and supermarkets around me. So when I need to get some food, I just grab it, pay, and go. I rarely think of where the food comes from. But honestly, we should be thinking about it because the way we currently produce and consume food globally is seriously harming our planet. According to the UN, global food production accounts for roughly 1/3 of all global greenhouse gas emissions. Farming takes up almost half of the world's habitable land, driving biodiversity loss, and it's also using more than 70% of the world's fresh water. Now, a key culprit at the heart of this problem? Well, it's cows, and particularly the world's taste for dairy. Globally, the dairy industry is worth nearly $900 billion, and it's relying on some 270 million cows. Now, all of those cows, they consume vast resources, feed, water, land, plus they burp millions of tons of methane into the atmosphere every year, a greenhouse gas which traps nearly 30 times more heat than carbon dioxide. Now, I personally have thought about going vegan before, and I have tried. I've tried plant-based milks from oats to soya to almond, but I have to confess, one of the things that I've really found hard to give up is cheese. I love it so much, and I don't think I'm the only one. So when I heard about the first solution today, I was particularly intrigued. It's a way to make real dairy products like milk and cheese without any cows. To find out more, our reporter Zoe Gelber has been looking into this, and she joins me now to tell us about all of this. And Zoe, my first question here has to be, cow-free cheese, what exactly is that?
Yeah, it does sound a bit weird, doesn't it? But
does.
bear with me, because as you've just explained, the environmental impact of industrial cattle farming is massive. And all over the world, people have been trying to figure out ways to reduce that. Part of that effort has been research into what's known as cellular agriculture. So you might have heard about people growing meat in labs from animal cells, for example. This is a bit like that, except for dairy.
So this is cheese that's been made in a lab. But the big question here is it real cheese?
Well, yes, basically. I mean, if you've ever tried a plant-based cheese, and I have, you'll know that it's very difficult to replicate the taste and texture of real cheese. And that's all because of the specific dairy proteins that are found in cow's milk. And now scientists have found a way to produce the exact same proteins, but using microorganisms like yeast or bacteria instead of cows. And it's all possible thanks to a process called precision fermentation.
Tell us what that is exactly.
So we eat fermented foods all the time, right? Like bread, alcohol, yogurt, exactly. This is something that we've been doing for hundreds of years. And what that means is that the process of making them involves a microorganism like yeast breaking down one substance into another, like sugar into alcohol and carbon dioxide, in the case of brewing beer, for example. Precision fermentation means modifying those same microorganisms so that they produce certain ingredients we want, like dairy proteins, for example. And so, in the case of cheese making, once you've got this protein, you can then add all of the other ingredients you need to make milk: water, sugars, fats, and from there make cheese from it. So you can end up with a product that's molecularly identical to traditional cheese, but just made differently, with no animals involved.
Right. Okay, so I get the why and how this happens, kind of. But the real question is, does it taste like actual cheese?
Well, as a fellow cheese lover, I had exactly the same question. So I went to a fermented cheese factory in East London to find out for myself. Hi. It's Javan.
Yes.
Zoe.
Nice to meet you, Zoe.
Javan Nagaraja is the founder of the company Better Dairy, a startup which is developing the UK's first cheese made from precision fermentation.
This is labs. All of this is office, and on this side we've got all the labs.
Amazing. Javan's background is in tech, but when he first heard about this process, he knew he wanted to get involved.
Precision fermentation is magical when you first hear about it. The fact that you can take these microorganisms that exist out there and manipulate them to produce whatever you want and brew whatever you want, that is, magic.
Now, it might sound kind of futuristic, but this isn't actually new technology. In fact, we've been using this process to make everyday medicines and food additives for years, albeit in small quantities. But over the past decade, in several labs and a few factories around the world, scientists have been experimenting with ways to use it at scale in order to make a new generation of staple foods like egg proteins and dairy products. Already, across the world, a number of startups have started making milk in this way, but Javan wanted to tackle a harder problem: cheese, and specifically, hard cheese.
Cheese is such an interesting thing. It's so delicious, it melts, it stretches, it oozes. The interesting thing about cheese is a lot of this functionality, and that's the way we think about it, functionality, it comes from one particular thing from milk, one protein, casein. For cheese, you really only need casein, and the only source of casein is cow's milk. And so for us, using precision fermentation, where you specifically create one particular ingredient, casein became a really alluring thing, and cheese is the thing that you can unlock from it. So that became our target.
For the past 4 years, Javan and the team have been inventing, fermenting, and bubbling away to try and find the perfect formula for creating casein proteins, and from there, developing recipes to make cheese from them. I wanted to see how it all worked for myself, so Natalie, one of their scientists, showed me around.
Welcome to the lab.
So I'm just coming to a big lab that is full of glass bottles with different coloured liquids and whirring machines and complicated looking computer type things. I haven't been in a lab since school, and this is a lot more complicated than the chemistry rooms in my school.
I hope this is quite different to your school lab. A lot more expensive equipment in here, which we've built up over the last sort of few years as we've found out what we need and the needs of the research.
Step 1 of the cheese making process begins with something called strain engineering.
What the term strain engineering means is taking microorganisms that will eventually produce dairy proteins and tweaking the DNA and the characteristics of those microorganisms to make them produce the protein of interest. We've actually got 2 different microorganisms on the go. We've got a fungus and we've got yeast, very similar to the yeast that's used in brewing beer. This is the fungal microorganism, and it's just growing on some plates.
So this just looks like little plastic dishes full of fungus.
Full of fungus. So they've got a sort of sugary jelly at the bottom here for them to grow on, and then there's a bit of sort of furry growth on the top. That's our nice happily growing fungi.
Delightful.
It won't look like that by the time it comes anywhere near
It's going to be a lovely cheese at the end. Like in beer brewing, these microorganisms are then fed a mixture of water and sugar where they grow and multiply.
And then when they finish growing, they generally grow them for a few days, and they take them out and they look at how healthy they look and how much protein we've actually produced in a certain amount of time.
From here, the proteins are purified and separated out into a fine powder so they can be used as a raw ingredient to make milk before following the usual processes to make cheese. So this is where the cheese is made. In the dairy science kitchen next door, I met Alex, who is working on their latest recipe.
So I'm halfway through making one of our cheddar prototypes. I've just got to the cheddaring stage.
The cheddaring stage?
Cheddaring stage.
Is that official terminology?
That's official terminology.
Are we able to try any of these cheddars?
Yeah, absolutely. We're really happy with this one. So this is just a few weeks old actually, but it has some really nice texture to it, and there's already some really nice kind of butteriness coming through, and it melts beautifully.
Yeah, it definitely looks like cheese. It's actually really good. I mean, it really does taste like cheese. But it is cheese, I suppose. It tastes like quite a mild cheddar. That's maybe a tiny bit chewier than like what a cheddar would be, possibly. Yeah.
So
if this was given to me as a cheese, I would think this was just a normal cheese.
You're totally right. It is a squeaky cheese at the moment. That is a facet of it being a young cheese. Over time, as the protein breaks down from the cells that are in there, that protein will kind of get chopped up, and you're left with something that's more crumbly and cheese-like as you know it.
Zoe, tell me that you brought back some cheese for me to taste.
Well, I wish I had. I actually asked if I could bring some back for you to try, but they said they needed all of their samples for a big tasting they were doing next week.
Oh, okay, so I guess I'll have to wait until this is in supermarkets. But how long will it be before we can see this on our shelves?
Well, as you heard, Alex and the team are still perfecting their recipes, so they hope to have their first cheese on the shelf by 2026. But around the world, there's loads of similar startups all working on their own animal-free dairy products right now. In fact, there's quite a lot of hype and investor interest in this field at the moment. $1 billion was invested in precision fermented dairy last year to try and get these products to the market sooner.
So Zoe, why is there so much hype out there? I mean, are we talking about the future of dairy products? And if we are, won't this have a negative impact on the farmers?
I mean, this is very much a technology in its infancy. There is a long way to go before this could even start to compete with the dairy industry as it is. I'm talking in terms of regulatory hurdles, the huge amount of infrastructure that would have to be built to start making it at scale, and of course for costs to come down. And in terms of farmers, this tech is not looking to displace small dairy producers, but rather at how we can make industrialized dairy production greener, which is part of why there's so much interest in this at the moment. Big food companies are facing a lot of pressure to reduce their carbon footprint, and many think this could be the answer to help them do that, or part of it at least. I've been speaking to Seren Kell from the Good Food Institute, a think tank working to accelerate innovation in this area, and she told me the environmental benefits could be huge.
When you look at what is understood about the environmental impacts of precision fermentation, we can see that there is massive potential to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and deforestation, biodiversity loss, water use, water pollution, and also non-environmental issues, public health issues like antibiotic resistance as well. So if you hone in on dairy specifically, one statistic that I think helps put this in context is that the 13 biggest dairy companies in the world produce the same amount of greenhouse gas emissions as the whole of the UK. And 90% of the corporate dairy industry's emissions are produced by the cows themselves, and that's mostly in the form of methane. So precision fermentation means that we're able to produce the same animal proteins, but just without farming animals, so that we can really make the same eggs, the same dairy and other foods, but again in a way that is just much less resource intensive.
And beyond just making food production greener, some think this could also be an answer to food security in the future too. The UN predicts that the world population will grow to nearly 10 billion by 2050, and with that, demand for meat and dairy is expected to increase by over 50%. That's a lot more milk and cheese.
The main point really is that precision fermentation is just a much more efficient way of producing food with the same amount of resources. And what that means is that we can meet the needs of a growing global population without having to cause things like further deforestation or resource usage. I think we're running out of time, and we really need to be using all approaches we have available to try and make our food system as efficient and sustainable as possible. And I see fermentation as the next step in feeding people much more efficiently. It's safe, it's clean, and it's vastly more sustainable than raising many, many animals intensively on farms.
Without sounding too cheesy, the future looks great.
Nice one.
Thank you, Zoe, for what we've heard today.
Thanks, Myra.
You're listening to People Fixing the World from the BBC World Service, and today we're looking at greener ways of feeding the world. Now, we've just heard about a novel way of making dairy in labs from microorganisms, but not all solutions to our global food crisis require advanced technology. In fact, our next solution relies on one of the oldest, cheapest, and most low-tech things that we have to produce food and fight climate change. I'm talking about trees. Now, it might not be obvious to many of us, but some of the most nutrient-rich foods we have originate from forests, from fruits, nuts, berries, to mushrooms and herbs. So, what if there was a way to get more of these trees and plants where people really need them? In Philadelphia, a large city in the northeast of the United States, food-bearing trees have started appearing in vacant spaces all over the city.
We plant a really wide range of things: fruit trees, nut trees, berry bushes, fruiting vines, perennial flowers and herbs, perennial vegetables. And we plant all of the sort of common fruits like apples and pears and peaches and plums, things like that. But we also plant a lot of more uncommon fruits. Persimmons and pawpaws and figs are all part of the mix. I'm Phil Forsyth. I'm co-executive director of the Philadelphia Orchard Project.
The Philadelphia Orchard Project, or POP for short, started back in 2007 with a simple idea to address hunger in the city.
The original vision for the Philadelphia Orchard Project was to make use of some of the abundant vacant land in Philadelphia and to use those spaces to grow perennial crops and food for those in need. And we have a city also of great need with the highest poverty rate of any of the 10 largest cities in the United States, with over a quarter of the population below the poverty line.
Today, roughly 1 in 10 households in Philadelphia are classified as food insecure, which basically means they don't have enough healthy, nutritious food to eat. Part of the challenge is that huge numbers of the city's poorer residents live in areas known as food deserts, meaning the nearest place to buy fresh fruit and vegetables is many miles away.
So people have to travel via public transit or other means that's not convenient to get to a place where they can purchase healthy food. So all they may have in the neighborhood is fast food or a corner store that generally doesn't have much in the way of produce at all.
To combat this, for the past 17 years, the Philadelphia Orchard Project has been working with local community groups and volunteers to plant community orchards all over the city.
We partner with community groups on land in their neighborhoods, planting fruit trees that will be there for decades, providing food year after year, and having community members actually caring for those plants, picking the fruit and distributing it within their neighborhoods. And we see this as a much more powerful way to change the culture around food in the city than either handing out food or opening up a grocery store. You could get people actually directly engaged in producing their own food.
Today, the project has helped plant 68 orchards throughout Philadelphia and counting. Phil and the team help design the orchards and educate communities on how to care for them. The rest, the growing, harvesting, and distributing of the fruit, well, that's left up to communities themselves, along with a small army of volunteers.
Welcome back, guys. It's really cool to see you guys. I'm really excited about this season.
On one of the first sunny days of the season, a group of orchard volunteers have come to the project's headquarters to learn about pruning the different kinds of trees.
Hi, I'm Roman. I volunteer here because it fills my soul.
Hi, I'm Tamir, they, them pronouns. This is my 3rd season. I'm just excited to play in the soil again.
Hi, I'm Nafisa, and I'm excited to learn more about companion planting.
Nafisa has been volunteering with the Orchard Project for 3 years now.
I got involved walking past another site, and I saw greenery in the city, which is very rare, and it looked like it was actually edible things growing.
Before getting involved, Nafisa knew nothing about food growing.
I didn't have a green thumb at all, unless it was a manicure, you know. No, I grew up in an area that a lot of people would call a food desert, so there were a lot of bodegas and corner stores. There weren't any grocery stores at all in a certain radius of where I lived. And so for a lot of people in the community I grew up in, and even myself, you kind of succumb to, like, you know, the candy and the processed foods.
Since she started, Nafisa has become a lead orchard volunteer, helping to grow food which has been distributed to local markets, after-school programs, and emergency food services all over the city. But for her, the biggest impact of her involvement has been personal.
I really can say that there's a very different feeling I have now about my mental health, my physical health, and even my emotional health, just because of, like, the insane, like, 180 changes I made to my diet, like going from M&Ms to cherry tomatoes that I helped grow, and I feel closer to what I grow, and I feel more connected with it now.
Philadelphia's orchards are part of a growing worldwide movement of planting food forests in cities. There are currently over 85 food forests in the US, from Seattle to Atlanta, with many cropping up around the world. Different from urban farms, food forests are perennial, meaning the trees and plants will continue to produce food year after year after year for communities to harvest and enjoy. But for Phil, the value of the forests goes beyond the food they produce, as well as the obvious environmental benefits from planting thousands of trees in cities. These orchards bring communities together around food growing, which can have a huge impact.
We think of the food yields as just one of the benefits of community orchards to cities. The most important being reconnecting city residents to nature and the food system. Often this is a new experience for people. Picking peaches from trees or blueberries from a bush or grapes from a vine is a new experience that really can have a powerful effect in connecting people and turning on the lights about, like, oh, everything I eat is grown somewhere by somebody or using particular means. It's pretty amazing to think about the thousands of fruit trees we've planted across the city in all these different spaces, how many have experienced them over the years and how it may have impacted them in different ways. It's just lovely to think of these trees being there for decades. They'll be there long past me being in the city and the many generations that will benefit.
That brings us to the end of this week's program. But what do you think about what you've heard today? Could food forests work where you live? And have you...
Listening to the BBC World Service.
I've been hearing from a generation united in fury and music.
Documentaries. It's where we can dive deeper than a headline to tell the full story.
I had not expected that this investigation was going to be so difficult for me.
I've been unraveling one of the most bizarre stories I've ever come across.
Where real-life events can be as compelling as drama.
Next thing I know, I see two cars pull down on me all black.
Told by the people who were there.
They started ramming my car. I was scared for my life.
Would I be able to get out of Afghanistan safe? Would not any member of the Taliban recognize me?
It was forbidden. You have to speak with a special person.
You were willing to take that risk?
Yes.
Documentaries on the BBC World Service at bbcworldservice.com/documentaries or wherever you get your BBC podcasts.
Next on the BBC World Service, is Saudi Arabia softening its alcohol ban? Berlin's techno scene gets protected status. Imagine waking up to find a Banksy in your garden. That's what happened to one BBC journalist last week. And the top US football player with a limb difference on breaking barriers and inspiring one young fan. The stories that got you talking online this week with me, Beth Ryder, in Pick of the World after the news.
BBC News with Chris Barrow. The Turkish president's AK party has suffered its biggest ever defeat in municipal elections. With nearly all the votes counted, the main opposition CHP has achieved its biggest victory in nearly 50 years. Tens of thousands of Israelis in Jerusalem have been taking part in what they say is the biggest anti-government protest since the war in the Gaza Strip began last October. They're urging the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, to step down. Mr. Netanyahu's office says he's successfully undergone surgery for a hernia. The Israeli leader, who's 74, was fitted with a pacemaker last year. Reports from Libya say the residence of the internationally recognised Prime Minister, Abdelhamid al-Dabeiba, in the capital Tripoli, has been targeted by rocket-propelled grenades. It's not clear who was responsible, and there are no reports of anyone being hurt. Salvage crews at the US port of Baltimore have removed the first section of the bridge that was brought down on Tuesday when it was hit by a container ship. The accident has halted maritime traffic on a major trading route. Gunmen in Ecuador have shot dead 9 people in the coastal city of Guayaquil as the country suffers a renewed surge in gang-related violence. The latest violent incident took place in the southern neighbourhood of Guasmo. It's the second mass killing in days. A new hate crime law has come into effect in Scotland 3 years after it was passed by members of the Scottish Parliament. It creates new effects of stirring up hatred in relation to characteristics including age, disability, religion and sexual orientation. One of Hong Kong's best-known independent bookstores has closed its doors for the last time as freedom of expression in the territory comes under further pressure. Hundreds of well-wishers went to Mount Zero Books on its final day. A sign over the door of the bookshop said, "Ideas are bulletproof." BBC News.
Hello and welcome to Pick of the World. I'm Beth Ryder from the social media team here at the BBC World Service, and this is the programme where you decide what I talk about based on your online clicks, comments, shares and downloads this week. And if you can hear a bit of noise going on behind me, that's because I'm here in our newsroom where people around me are busy putting together today's radio programmes. Coming up in a bit, we'll hear from one of my BBC colleagues who woke up to find a new artwork by superstar graffiti artist Banksy painted in his garden. His video is being viewed by millions of you this week. But first to Saudi Arabia, where a shop selling alcohol has opened in the capital, Riyadh. It's only going to be for diplomats, and there's monthly restrictions on how much they can buy, but it's still being seen as a big deal for the country. Alcoholic drinks have been banned there for more than 70 years. As Saudi Arabia's leader, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, often called MBS, tries to make the kingdom more of a tourist and business destination, is it a sign of things to come? Business Daily's been covering the story. Here's Rick Kelsey speaking to 20-year-old Saudi Safe.
I think it's a good thing to the fact that it should be limited as well, because in the end, like, Saudi will always be seen as like an Islamic state because of the two holy cities in Mecca and Medina. But to a limit, I'd say it's really exciting, and I think it attracts a lot of new people to come visit, I think.
So you think that type of opening up could actually bring more tourists in?
Yes, yeah, for sure. Especially with like many of my mates in uni as well, who are not from Saudi, obviously. Whenever I speak to their parents or whatever, they keep mentioning the NEOM project, like the Lion City. I think if that's opening, it's going to attract a lot of visitors, and then if alcohol's there as well, it would just it's a more social thing as well. So more people would enjoy visiting, I'd say, compared to now.
Do you think there's a difference between how young people and older people think when it comes to how quickly alcohol policy should change in Saudi?
Oh yeah. Oh, there's a huge difference. So I was with a mate actually recently. He was in Uber back home. That driver was telling him how he doesn't agree with any of the changes that MBS is bringing through. And obviously he's a bit older, and my mate was just disagreeing with him the whole time because he thinks what MBS is doing is really good. But the older people, I don't think they will ever agree on the alcohol policies opening up, because they don't even agree with the concerts or just the general things that are happening now.
You feel like the divide between how young people and old people feel is actually getting bigger the quicker all these changes start to happen?
Yes, for sure, yeah. They see Saudi as a place where it's too holy and religious, where it can't be seen as a place where there's drunk people on the streets or anything like that.
And we were really surprised by the reaction to this story on our Facebook page. It reached over 2 million of you, and almost 300,000 of you engaged with it. And the responses are really divided, actually, between literally hundreds of people welcoming the move, calling it significant and a good development, asking when they might be able to go and visit the kingdom, but also other comments like this from Ahmed Zaid.
It raises concerns about the potential impact on public health, social order, and the overall image of Saudi Arabia.
And Renata Davidson from Poland writes,
"A very bad move, nothing to be happy about, and definitely not a sign of progress."
And I'm not really sure what Camp JB falls into.
This is how we started in Uganda. Now we are the biggest alcohol consumer in East Africa and one of the biggest in the world. Congratulations, Saudi Arabia.
Now to somewhere you'll have no problem getting a drink if you're that way inclined. Berlin's famous techno clubs have just been added to the UN Cultural Agency UNESCO's heritage list. They're one of the city's biggest draw for visitors, including me a few times, I'll admit. So what makes them so special? James Menendez spoke to Christoph Kostlin, an avid clubgoer based in Berlin, to find out.
It sort of started when people were celebrating the connection between East and West Berlin, so there are a lot of empty factory halls which were occupied by raves. Techno has a way of going on, basically has no end in terms of flow. Therefore, coupled with that there was no curfew in East Berlin, for example, it sort of gave the groundwork to make a party open-end. You couldn't be at a concert which goes all night long, you know, but could go to a techno rave which goes all night long, even for days. You couldn't move near a club and complain now about the noise. You couldn't do that. So therefore, it's very well protected by the people.
I have heard some people say that the Berlin club scene has lost its edge in recent years. It's lost some of that sort of anarchic energy.
I would say to a certain degree, yes, because, you know, every generation has their own style of music they like. They have their own, maybe also they consume different drugs, they celebrate differently. They're also subject to change, and it's a way of either you go with it or you don't. I listen to different music as I was like 10 years ago. Also, was it better back then? Who am I to judge?
And I have to say, I got really into this story and wanted to know more, so I've been speaking to Peter Kern, a Berlin-based DJ and music promoter. He's from Kentucky, but he's been living there since 2011. And I started by asking him what made him stay.
Music is just in the streets, in the water, in everybody's lives here all the time. And so coming from originally suburban Kentucky by way of New York, I found it really irresistible. And because I'm also a music technologist, or I write about the technology of music making, this is a mecca for that as well. So a lot of the tools that are used to produce the electronic music that you hear in clubs are developed here. 2 large companies, Ableton and Native Instruments, are here. They also came because they were following the culture and the music. And so there are just nerds everywhere, right? There are just people building synthesizers and drum machines and